I don't know. When I first started meditating, I was working in a jazz club, and so it was quite an intense atmosphere. We worked really hard, like 12, 14-hour shifts, live music. You had to be fast. And I was learning to meditate, starting to meditate, and it was just the opposite. This moment of awakening, of remembering yourself, you have to make more and more and longer and longer. So when I was doing this in the jazz club, we sold beer in jugs because it was a classy establishment. And when you put the jug under the beer tap, you had 8 seconds. Put it in, the beer goes in, you got 8 seconds. And I would use that every time I fill a jug just to remember myself for 8 seconds, and then you're off. And just doing that like 20 times a night just totally transformed my entire experience of being at work. So yeah, you have to find ways to do it. One guy came to my temple, he sat with my abbot, he's from another place, and the first time that he came in and sat, sorry, am I boring? I mean, I don't mind a yawn, but like, and he came and the first time that he came and sat with this teacher, he attained to all these psychic powers. You could open up, you could start to see devas and heavens and hells and all this stuff going on. This was within a couple of hours of him sitting there. And then he went back, and he was actually the part owner and runner, like managing director of the Chao River cruise boat, one of them. This would be about 30 years ago. So that's quite an intense job. You know, a lot of public, you got all the music and the food and the staff. I mean, it's a crazy job. And he just had this experience that one time coming to meditate, and he just wanted to meditate more. So he'd actually lock himself in the broom cupboard in his office and sit there and meditate in the broom cupboard. And when the staff would come in to find him, they can't see him and they'd leave. And he'd just take an hour or half an hour at a time and find that way to reconnect with the meditation. So if you want to do it, you'll do it. That's the only way. There's no tricks. You know, people often, when you ask questions, you want a trick, right? You want to, like, if I do X, then I can get this peace. And no, you only get peace by giving up agitation. I did some talks for the YPO business group a few years ago, and the guy, he's a good friend of mine, and he says, right, we're wealthy people, we have a lot of money, we have a lot of things to do with our time, we don't want nonsense, we don't want religious stuff, we don't want faffle, we want the shortest, sharpest, hardest, fastest way to get into meditation. Why? So you can get back to work faster. You can't do X. You know, there's that philosophy of doing something as a primary action or a secondary action. So, for example, striking a match is striking a match. There's no other way. You have to strike the match. You can't do a chant to get the match to light up. You know, you can't make an offering to a statue or a god and the match lights up. It's a primary action. Unlike other things, like you pay your taxes, but you get road lights, right? So that's a secondary action. You do one thing, but you get a different thing back. So meditation really is primary thing. You can't do something that's going to give you a trick that suddenly makes your meditation better. You just have to work primary on that clay, which is your mind. You have to make the pot. And people often like, well, if I do especially Thais, they come and do like chants, certain recitations, and then they want to get more peace or meditation or something, I don't know. So yeah, proper meditation is a primary, it's not the word primary, it's a direct action, it's not a secondary thing.
I missed the metaphor with the match, sorry. I was listening and I realized my ears didn't take it in.
Okay. Some actions are primary in terms of to do the action, you have to do the action. Some actions are secondary. You do A, but you get B in response. So if you go to work and you work for 10 hours or 8 hours, at the end of the week you get money in a payment. So you're doing A to get B back. So that's a secondary result of an action. But some actions are primary, that you can't do anything else to replace the action. So to strike a match, you have to strike a match. You can't chant to a statue and hope the match lights up. Right? It sounds silly, but people do this, and they want the trick to meditation. Like, well, if I have the right cushion, but people have spent so much money trying to buy the right meditation cushion. I did see this one woman. We shouldn't laugh at people, but it was on a retreat, and she had this wooden bench. And she'd come in and sit on this wooden bench with a back and a thing for the legs, under the legs, and then a thing for under the knees. And she'd sit on this thing, and then she'd wind a stick. And her back would come back, her legs would come in, and then she'd get... And then she could meditate, but then after about 15 minutes, she'd have to click, 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 click. Click, click, click. It was absolutely insane, but this is why we shouldn't laugh at people. I found out afterward she had severe arthritis, and so she just couldn't get comfortable in the body, and she certainly couldn't sit on the floor. So I felt bad about the entire meditation retreat. You're going to click, 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 and I was thinking, I'm going to make clicks and see how you feel. And but it's just stuck in my mind that trying to get comfortable, like eventually you have to take a responsibility and like, okay, I'm going to look at discomfort rather than try to make myself comfortable. And things aren't usually that bad when you see it primary, so when you see it in yourself. Things that you thought were bad really aren't. And things that you didn't think were bad start to become bad. Like crowds and nightclubs. I never liked nightclubs, but I used to, I lived in New Zealand, so I obviously drank a lot of beer. There's nothing else to do in New Zealand. And so I'd been started going on meditation retreats, and I came back and I went to my old housemate, and the first thing we did, we went out to play pool and drink beer. And when I got there, I just had this moment of that kind of mindfulness moment, and I suddenly realized that the stench of alcohol in this place and the noise of 50 people all talking loudly and the feeling of the beer and then playing the pool, and I was thinking, like, why do I want my balls to go in? Like, that was the most important thing in the world, was like, yes, I got that perfect shot. People, oh, it's a very good shot. And now I'm thinking, I don't care if the ball goes in. What? So yeah, that kind of awakening, that mindfulness moment that arises. We're going to sit together for a while, if you're all ready. We're on live streaming. We're going? Okay. Is anybody logged in?
One light already.
One light.
We got one light.
It was a good joke.
Okay, settle yourself into your meditation posture. You got me thinking of more stupid things now.
I love knowing that you're thinking.
Well, it's this thing about with boxers, when they whether boxers should learn mindfulness. So I was talking with some sports coaches about this, and we came to my idea was that you want to practice mindfulness in between the rounds when you have that 60 seconds. And if you can stop, breathe, reassert your attention, this will be good. But then we were trying to figure out the boxer probably won't want to win anymore. So, okay, settle yourself into your meditation mind state. If you have a practice, do carry on with that practice you're accustomed to. If you're not experienced with meditation, I'd recommend you focus on the breath as it runs through the center of the body. Try to be aware of the whole body with the breath running through it. The mind will wander away from this meditation object. When you realize your mind has wandered off to thinking about this or that, interrupt your mind process and bring it back to the attention, to the breathing through the center of the body. You can leave your breath breathing by itself, no need to control. And no need to worry, do I follow the breath? Do I lock onto it at this place or that place? So long as your attention is inside the body. And teach yourself to be comfortable with the neutral feeling of the breathing. It's not exciting, it's not unpleasant. For those with experience, carry on with the system you're accustomed to. So for the last couple of minutes of the meditation, turn your attention to the idea of loving kindness, metta, an unconditional well-wishing for all world beings. Use any method you can to try to arouse this feeling, bring it into being, a thought, feeling and perception. Being careful to remove any thoughts, feelings or perceptions that are the opposite, that are closed off, unloving, uncaring. These perceptions we abandon from the mind and prevent from arising. This beautiful mind state, sobana citta, beautiful mind, you arouse it. Call it into being using any method that you can. Visualization, using the words, using memory. If it's difficult, just pretend to have it. Universal metta, loving kindness, the brightness of the mind. Wishing all world beings, may they be happy, peaceful, free from suffering. Sabbe buddha balapatta pachekanancha yambalang arahantanancha te jena rakang bandami sapatsuva sabba buddha nubhavena sabba dhamma nubhavena sabba sangha nubhavena sattha soti bhavantu te. Today is the official royal ploughing ceremony day. There is some confusion of whether it's today or Wednesday. I still haven't figured it out. According to Grok, the date is set in advance on the Thai calendar, and that was set to today, the Monday. But as the royal schedule becomes developed, the actual royal ceremony of doing the ploughing ceremony might come on a different day. So this time it comes on Wednesday. And were the schools closed today? No. See, the school outside my window was shut, but I think they just shut for any excuse. Anybody else whose schools or government offices closed today? Not that you noticed. So today's is the calendar day for it, but Wednesday is the ceremony. I haven't figured out why. I spend a lot of time in Thailand like that, like why? Trying to work things out. The ploughing ceremony goes back to long before the time of the Buddha. And there's a ceremonial marking of the planting of the crops. So when the ground is first turned up, usually bring the king out, and the king will bless the land. There was always a feeling that the royal family and the bounty of the land were connected. You see this in, what's that silly movie? Lord of the Rings. Right? When the evil guy takes over, everything goes dark and cloudy and rainy, and the crops fail. And when they finally destroy the ring, the sun comes out and the spring comes up. So there's always been this idea of a close connection between the king or the royalty and the land. When one is sick, the other gets sick. When one is well, the other gets well. And this particular association goes back a long, long way, long predating Buddhism. So what they would do is, in India at the time, was when you break the ground, you would have the king come and break the ground, and you would have people come and do chanting and give blessings, and that's to bring a nice new spring and have a good crop for the year. So the story goes that this was what the Buddha had seen as a child. However, and he'd seen his father doing this ploughing ceremony, and as a 6-year-old child, while he was watching it, he went into a spontaneous meditation. And in that meditation, he attained to something. Let's park that for a moment. What is the thing that he saw or understood? And then after that, he goes through his life. The story is recorded in one particular sutta. And in this sutta, original story is important. And in this sutta, the Buddha describes how he used to have a life of luxury in 3 palaces, one for the hot season, cold season, and a rainy season. This is a story motif. It doesn't mean he actually had 3 palaces. This story motif occurs quite often in India across different traditions. And it symbolizes the life of luxury. So he rejected the life of luxury, he goes out and ordains, and he goes to find 2 teachers. These 2 teachers teach him deep meditation, concentration systems. Having attained to what these 2 teachers have taught him, he follows their path, he gets to the end, and he says, "Now what?" And they say, "Nothing, you've done it, you've finished." And he's like, It's a bit like how I felt when I finished my master's. Like, it took me 12 years. She went to the same university. After 12 years, and then I finally got it, and I was like, and what? So he attained to what these teachers were teaching, and he was like, still haven't got to anything meaningful. They're like, no, you've completed the course. You can go and teach now. So he goes off and he starts to practice renunciation methods, starvation, to the point, he said, he puts his hand on his stomach, he can feel his backbone. So little did he have to eat. I think he got down to 7 grains of rice at one point, 7 grains of rice per day. Still wasn't enlightened, so he cut it down to 1 grain. Eventually realizing that doing these ascetic practices isn't going to bring about enlightenment either. So he gives that up. And then he goes off to sit under the Bodhi tree, and with the famous adhitthana or resolution, I will sit here until I attain to enlightenment, even if my bones turn to dust. I don't know if you've ever tried that. Come with a resolution. I've done it not to attain to enlightenment and not forever, but I have sat and said, right, I'm going to sit for 5 days without lying down and just going to meditate. And then, well, if I get to the end of the night, and then you get to midnight and you're like, I'll try again tomorrow. As monks, you do this a lot because it's quite boring in a monastery. So ascetic practices are a way to try to liven things up or give yourself goals to attain to. So they're quite popular, surprisingly popular in monasteries. The story goes, I never asked him about this, but Ajahn Jayasaro, when his teacher Ajahn Chah was dying, he made this resolution that I'm not going to lie down. It's called sitter's practice. So you have to sleep sitting up. and you make the resolution, your shoulders don't touch the floor. That's the resolution. You can still sleep, and you find all kinds of cunning ways to sleep bent over a chair or a yoga ball. The story goes, I should check this with him, that he made a resolution to do this sitter's practice while Ajahn Chah is still alive. And then Ajahn Chah somehow stayed alive for another 11 years. And apparently he didn't lie down for 11 years. I don't know, does anyone know if he's... I have to check with him how true that story was. You know how stories get kind of exaggerated. I've heard stories about me, I'm like, oh, did I really do that? Wow.
I think Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Namero also tried that, and he did that for quite a while as well when he was early years of his monk.
See, Ajahn Amaro is like that. He has this steely resolution
Yeah.
that the rest of us would find quite draining. We used to be afraid when in Amaravati, when Ajahn Amaro would come, half of these like, oh no, we have to up our game now Ajahn Amaro is around. And the other half of you would think, that's a good thing. But, then he'd go off to America and everyone would relax a bit.
He told the story about that himself, and then he said, but he told Ajahn Tomato that he was going to stop it. He thought that Ajahn Tomato would encourage him to keep going. And Ajahn Tomato said, oh, finally.
Yeah, I tried it myself a little bit, but I was telling it to some Russians, these Russians I shared a room with early in my career, and I was telling this one Russian, he's still in Thailand actually, and he's like, I'm going to do that, because Russians are a bit crazy, I don't know if you know that. I mean, I like them a lot, but there's something not the same as other people. So he heard this, this is a good idea, and so he decided he was going to do it. And he said to me, I sat with the intention I'm going to stay up all night. He said, and then I woke up and I was lying on the floor. So he gave up. I've tried it myself, I've done it myself a little bit. But resolutions. So the Buddha made these resolutions of not eating, etc. And when he realized that ascetic practices of these kinds are not going to help him, he goes to sit under the Bodhi tree, and he remembers this experience he had as a child. Now here's the important thing about this story. There comes a point in some human beings' lives, and some people just will look at you as if you're stupid if you say this. You're all here, so I'm trusting that you're not going to look at me like I'm stupid. That there comes a point where you have an experience, a spiritual experience, a kind of awakening, and you don't know what it is or why it is or how it works. But once that chink has opened, somehow there's nothing you can really do to get away from it. And I've met a lot of people, including myself, who are not holy people. They're not somebody you would expect to go and live in a monastery and dedicate to the holy life. I've met quite a few people like this. I count myself as one of them. But having that experience that just opens the door, you can't really say what it is, and then even as you live your life, it fades, and you can't remember what it was. You just kind of remember that you knew something for a moment, and now you can't really remember what it was, but it was definitely there. So this happens a lot with meditators, that there is that experience. Sometimes it happens with people take drugs. I've never taken a drug, I don't trust it, but I know that this has happened with people. Getting close to death, having extreme grief, sometimes just having a moment of peace or a moment that has snapped you out of your thinking, and you get a kind of awakening. I had one of these experiences. I'd already started to become a meditator, so it's a little bit later, but I was in New Zealand and there was a mountainside and a river comes out of the middle of the mountainside. And it's quite spectacular and takes a long walk and it's quite beautiful and there's some reasonable pathways. And we had like a group trip to go and see it. And so we walk along this long trek. I guess about an hour of walking, and then we come around past the tree, and there it is, a river coming out in the middle of a mountainside. It's quite incredible. And my thought was, I wonder what's in the sandwiches. And I caught the thought, if you know what I mean. It's not that thought particularly, it's not the thing, but it's that moment of catching it. And I realized I've just spent an hour walking through the bush to see this thing, and it doesn't make me feel any better. It is like, wow, you could take a picture, you could post it on Facebook. There was no Facebook back then. It's what iGen doesn't realize. But what does it give me? And so I was more interested in what was in the sandwiches, because that's at least going to give me like 5-10 minutes of actual experience. But that moment of catching it, it opened that door to me. It wasn't the first kind of spiritual experience, but it opened the door of not externalizing my feelings. That seeking things in the outside world isn't going to do it. That it's an emptiness of sensory experience in the technical language. Lewis Carroll had noticed this too. You know who wrote the Alice in Wonderland? Remember Alice? She's falling down the rabbit hole. She's falling and falling very fast. And as she falls, she notices there's things on the walls of the well, jars, and she picks a jar off the wall and looks at it, and it says strawberry jam. And she looks in and there's no jam. And she puts the jar back. Now this is while she's falling at full speed, right? This typical Alice in Wonderland. But if you know meditation, you know that if you come into, you try to stabilize the external world with stories that sort the world into jobs and right and wrong and things you have to do and you don't want to do. But to a meditator looking inwards, you don't see this stable world. You see this endless churn of thoughts and feelings. I think about this and then this and this, and then my mind goes to that, and then I feel like this, and then I have to get up and I have to do that. And you see this procession of one thing after another, after another, after another. That's Alice falling down the well. Her picking out jars that have labels on but nothing inside. That's when you realize that outward sensory perceptions is not as happy as it used to be. You can't get so excited about things as you used to get excited about. We were talking earlier about nightclubs, and when you first, I always hated nightclubs. I'm an introvert. I don't like noise. So I never particularly liked it, but all my friends did, so I would go with them, and you go to this place. I remember one nightclub called Placemate 7, and it had 7 rooms with 7 different kinds of music in it. And it's like, wow. Now I'm thinking, I've got YouTube, I've got 300 times the music, and I don't want any of them. But that externalization of feelings, of like this and this and this, and then when attention returns to yourself, you know, those things become empty. The Buddha also used this analogy of an empty pot. He said, imagine a person goes into a village. It's a long analogy, but this part of the analogy, the man goes into the village and it has no people in it. And he goes into each of the huts, and there are no people in the huts. And in the huts he finds pots, and he looks in the pots and there's nothing there. So he's using the same analogies. When you have awoken that spiritual process. The external things become empty of real meaning that they had before. Now, you can't say this to somebody who hasn't started to experience it, because they're going to look at you like you're crazy. Maybe some of you think I'm crazy right now. But I think all, or probably most of you, have started to have that awakening. It's like, yeah, things, part of it's getting older, I know that. I love that Ricky Gervais thing. I'm not a big fan of his, but he does come out with some classics. When he wrote The Office with his writing partner, Stephen Merchant, Stephen was 26 years old and Ricky was 40. And he said, while we were writing The Office, Stephen was discovering hip-hop, and I was discovering I have a favorite chair. So this awakening occurs. There's something that opens up the chink in the armor to some people and not others. You talk to a lot of people, they have no idea what you're talking about. These experiences that come from childhood. So I want to give you one story that is the story of the hero's journey, one of the original stories. And the most famous version is in the Knights of the Round Table. And the most famous of versions is the story of Parzival, the knight. But this story actually goes way back before Christianity. So Parzival lives at home with his mother. His father had been a knight and had been killed. His mother wanted to protect him and didn't want Parzival to get the same fate. So she kept him in the forest, away from civilization. One day, 4 knights come through the forest, and Parzival sees them and he says, I want that. So he tells his mother, I'm leaving home and I'm going in search of this knighthood. She's not happy. So he goes off, and while he's searching, he meets an old man. And the old man gives him some advice. Now, usually the advice in different versions of the story is don't talk too much. Curious. Asita is the name of this particular motif, because he occurs in a lot of stories. He occurs in Star Wars, which was based on this, deliberately so. Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? Obi-Wan Kenobi can't win the fight, but he can advise. So Parzival then carries on, having learned a little from this wise old man, and then he stumbles upon the kingdom of the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail kingdom is ruled by a king whose name is Amfortas. Now, if you put a in front of something, it means not. So it's the same word as comfortable, but you change comfortable into not comfortable, you get Amfortas. So his name means suffering. I'm relying mostly on Richard Wagner's version here, but if you want more about this story, we can talk about it later. So the king is suffering because he has a wound that will not heal. But there is the Holy Grail, which will give a happiness that knows no end. But they don't know how to use the Holy Grail. So they praise it and they worship it and they do these ceremonies to it. So our knight, Parzival, he comes and he sees this Holy Grail. Parzival has come upon this kingdom by accident. He doesn't know how he got there. And while he's there, he fails to ask the correct question. The correct question is, who am I? In Wagner's version, Wagner didn't like the question, so he cut this out of his version. So Parzival then, failing to ask the right question, is thrown out of the magic kingdom of the Holy Grail, and he has to spend a lifetime living in the world, learning and suffering, until eventually he finds his way back into the kingdom. And he finds his way back to the Holy Grail kingdom by... There's a character called Kundry. She's the temptress. She tries to tempt him. And just as their lips are about to meet, he realizes that she's the one that's keeping him from this magic kingdom. And his renunciation of her kiss is what enables him to go back to the kingdom. So the meaning of this story is, and this story goes back a long, long way and is repeated in many cultures, in many stories. The meaning of this story is, when you are young, you attain to this thing, or at some point young in your spiritual life, you attain to this experience. In Parsifal's case, it means attaining to the Grail Kingdom. But you don't know how you got there, you don't know the meaning of it, and you don't know how to work with it. So you lose that experience. But once you've had that little awakening, it lodges in your psyche. And no matter what you do, somehow or other, you're going to keep coming back to the path. And I've seen this a lot, like people come to the monastery and they want to ordain, and I'm going to meditate, I'm going to get enlightened, I'm going to be so disciplined. And then usually like a few weeks later, they're leaving, these monks are no good, the abbot's no good, and they leave. But once that door has opened, even if you leave, you're going to come back again. Somehow or other, you're going to keep returning to the path. The Buddha described it this way. Imagine a ship that's gone a long way from the shore. The ship carries a cage of birds with it. Every so often, when they need to know where land is, they let out a bird. The bird flies up. If it sees land, it goes to that direction. If it can't see land, it lands back on the ship. So that's how the boats know which way to get to land. He said in the same way, you might go and explore all kinds of different teachings. But once that awakening has started to happen, you're going to keep coming back to this ship until the day that we put into harbour. So that's, I can tell you from my own life experience. As a child, I used to enter into these meditation states. I had no idea what it was. I'd ask my parents. I'd ask other people. Nobody could tell me what it was. And then eventually, what I would do is I would always look into the corner of a room, usually with not, in a blank corner. Go into the corner of the room, and then I'd enter into this state. I couldn't tell you what the state was, what it meant. It felt familiar. It didn't feel like a thunderbolts and lightning. It just felt like how things should feel. And then as I got older, I lost it. And I remember the day I was trying to get back to this state, and I realized I have too many thoughts in my mind. So that chink, that awakening experience happens at some point. Maybe you don't remember it. Maybe it happened and you just remember that you had it. But you can't name it or remember it. So this is what the meaning is of the Parsifal story, that he had this experience. He attained to the Grail Kingdom, but he does so through ignorance. He does so through innocence, not ignorance. So our problem is ignorance. But the first time you attain to this through innocence, because you don't know. This is why Luke Skywalker is always a bit simple and childish and boyish, and why they had problems writing him into the last series of Star Wars, because he's now an old man. So you have to change him from being the childish innocence into the non-ignorance. Does that make sense? So go back to this story of the Buddha himself. This happened in the Buddha's lifetime. When he was a child, he'd seen his father doing this ploughing ceremony. And while he was doing so, his nurses left him underneath the tree. And while he's under the tree, he spontaneously enters into this jhana, this state of meditation. Now, fast forward years later in his life, he'd been to these two teachers, he'd practiced their systems, he'd been told, you're a teacher now. He's like, nah, still haven't got it. He'd practiced these ascetic practices, starving himself, holding his breath, not wearing clothes, all the rest of it. That hadn't done it either. He'd realized that he has to take some food. He'd taken some food from Sujata. She'd offered him this milk rice. And he'd gone to sit under the Bodhi tree. According to the sutta, the Buddha's own account, he said, at that point, I remembered the time when I was sitting under the tree watching my father in this ploughing ceremony. And I remember at that time I had a certain experience in my mind. And I asked myself, is that experience that I had as a child, is that the right way to enlightenment? And the answer came to my mind, yes, that is the correct way to enlightenment. And then he practiced during the night of enlightenment and became enlightened. So that was the hidden meaning of the ploughing ceremony story. These things, remember, because these are difficult philosophical ideas, they take explanation, but the way that these ideas are recorded and transmitted is by story. And most specifically, story that you can paint, because most of Buddhism was transmitted by paintings. And you would go to a temple and you would see the painting and someone would tell you, this is what's happening in the story. Years ago, I worked with Ploughing Royal Foundation. We went to the Emerald Buddha Temple. And have you been there? And it has all the incredible murals along the side. You've all seen this, right? The immoral Buddha. I thought that joke was quite funny. So I was part of a project and we went in and we scanned the walls, the entirety of the 4 walls. We scanned them in, pinpointed each story and then animated the story and narrated it. Could we get anybody to tell us what each story was? It took 2 years to actually navigate, to find actually which way in chronological sequence the stories were arranged, and then to find people to actually tell us what the story was. But that's how it was transmitted in the old days. So this moment of the Buddha having an experience as a child was something that would be painted. And so they would paint his father doing this ploughing ceremony, breaking the earth, a symbol of new awakening, right? And the Buddha sat underneath the rose apple tree watching. Now the original story, that's it, that's the end of the talk, but I will tell you just because it's interesting. In the original story that we have it as recorded, here's the actual original text. I recall, this is the Buddha speaking, I recall sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree. This is after he'd been through his practices, ascetic practices, taken some food, he sat underneath the Bodhi tree now. She's in his night of enlightenment. He says, at that point I recall sitting in the shade of a rose apple tree while my father was off working. Quite secluded from sensual pleasures and unskillful qualities, I entered into and remained in the first jhana absorption state, which has rapture and involves keeping the mind placed and connected. There are different translations of this. You'll notice there's no mention of any ploughing ceremony, right? He just says he recalled his father was off working and he sat under a tree. So I'm presuming the ploughing ceremony was a story that got added in later. Presumably because ploughing ceremony, breaking the earth, symbolizes the new awakening. And secondly, so you can paint it. You can paint the father off working, because the king wouldn't normally be ploughing the field, right? So that was the original story. Here's one of the commentaries that came up, I don't know, some 600-800 years later. So it was time for the ploughing ceremony. The city was decked out like a city in heaven, and the delighted people in all their finery assembled at the king's supreme residence, and with his body adorned, the head of the people, having taken his son, who was also adorned with many adornments. Like Saka, the king of the gods at play, the master of men went to the ploughing festival. None of this in the original, right? Having laid the bodhisattva at the root of a certain rose apple tree, surrounded with a glorious and charming screen, the nurses went outside to watch the festival. While sitting on that pleasant couch at the root of that glorious canopied rose apple tree, it wasn't just any rose apple tree, it was a glorious canopied one, which was resplendent with golden stars. I guess they hang the stars on like a Christmas tree for the ceremony. And having taken the opportunity, the hero, the Buddha, attained meditative absorption. Having seen him sitting there like a golden statue, the rose apples tree's shadow stayed still and didn't move to help the bodhisattva attain to enlightenment. And the nurses saw this. Such is the wonderful nature of your son. His face shone like a clear moon and his eyes were like lotuses. And the king pronounced, "This is the time I pay respects to my son." So this was a little embellishment, which I think is a good thing. You want to bring the point of story rather than a historical record is a story can evolve and grow and become more effective over time and more relevant to its listeners. So stories should change and grow. But you do notice in the Theravada suttas, you usually get this simple thing. And then the commentaries on the Theravadas, they ramp it up like this. And by the time you get to Tibetan, you have like hordes of countless millions of angels will come down and bow and worship, and light will explode everywhere in colors. And so the story goes here that the shade of the rose apple tree stayed on the Buddha. I mean, even though the sun moved, the shade stayed there to help him in his meditation. Here's my takeaway from the story. I'll finish here. That we have these experiences either as a child or some early point on in your spiritual life. There's a point where you attain to something and you don't know what it is, you can't explain it, you can't nail it down. And the more you try to explain it, the more you're probably going to go off onto weird explanations and beliefs. But the thing that you touched on was real, and that thing that you touched will keep coming back, and will keep you coming back to do meditation of some kind, because you know there is another experience, another way of being, and you can't get away from it once you've touched it. This is why they say in Ramana Maharshi's ashram in India, if you walk around the mountain, you're guaranteed enlightenment. Because you've done something for the sake of enlightenment. And it's a difficult, in those days it was a difficult walk. Now they have ice cream and coffee shops and things. But even when I went there 30 years ago, it was quite a hard walk, a lot of thorns and no paths. I thought you should walk around the top bit because it only takes a couple of minutes. But apparently you have to walk around the base bit because it takes 6 hours. And you're guaranteed enlightenment. But what's the meaning of that? If you've done something for the sake of enlightenment, you've made a statement to yourself, you've opened up that chink a little bit in your psyche. So this motif of attaining to an attainment through ignorance, and then later on you're going to have to come to it through giving up of ignorance, is something that goes through all spiritual traditions. That's the ploughing ceremony. Any thoughts, comments, questions, observations? Did you have a moment where something opened up for you? Can you remember it?
Any questions? Okay.
Yeah, I've had several experiences where, things opened up for me. And trying to hold on to them or and is very difficult, and trying to repeat them, I think it's impossible, because it would be like trying to fall in love with your wife again. You fell in love with your wife 10 years ago. You can't have that experience again. It's the same thing, I think, with some enlightenment experience or ecstatic experience. But at the same time, it's frightening, because if you really go fully ahead with it, it means you have to change your idea of who you are. You have to change your relationship with the world, with the universe. And so I've known people who had those experiences who kept trying to repeat it and never could. And some of them went back to their, corporate job or, materialistic existence or whatever, because they couldn't go forward with. That might explain why some people stay in the monastery for a certain period of time and then leave and go back. It's just asking so much of us to stick with that.
It's a tricky path, a difficult path. Ajahn Sumedho would say this, that because people would mention childhood experiences and saying you can't hold on to that and you can't get back to that. And I felt that was right for a very long time, until I got back to the experience I'd had as a child. But now I know what it is, how I'm doing it, why I'm doing it, how it works. The unconditioned is real. It's actually there. Those experiences come from touching the unconditioned, or the Buddha nature, different words for it. When you touch that, that's the thing. That's the thing that lodges in your mind. And some way or other, with your practice, you have to get back and touch it again. Now, you can't recreate an experience by trying to manipulate the mind, because you have to step out of the mind to get back to that thing. But at the same time, I spent years thinking, well, I forget about that thing I had as a child. But actually it was right. And years later I found out that it was right when I finally figured out exactly how meditation works, what it's supposed to do, and how to withdraw the mind from the normal process of perceiving objects. Then you enter into jhana. Here in the sutta, the Buddha says explicitly, categorically, he says, when I was a child, I entered into the first absorption, the first jhana. Now, as an adult, the question arises to me under the Bodhi tree, is that the right way? And the answer came to me, yes, that is the correct way. That's the actual words of the sutta that I just read out. So the Buddha himself is saying it explicitly, absolutely. There is that thing that he had experienced as a child, and he has to get back to that. So there is a caveat. If you're trying to recreate states of mind, that really doesn't work. But somehow you have to get back to that unconditioned. Now, what unconditioned means? This is a technical term in Buddhism. What this means is conditioned consciousness means explicitly and exactly, this isn't speculation, this is exactly how it's described. Conditioned consciousness means your mind or attention has gone to an object. When attention lands on an object, that thing then fills your consciousness, your thought, your memory, your feeling as a gestalt, as a full body, full mind experience. If you think right now about your best friend's funeral, or ice cream, or the air conditioner, or something, you can move your attention to any experience. You can experience the speaker here behind me. You can put your attention onto it. Now your consciousness is conditioned with that thing. That's what's meant by conditioned experience. Means attention has gone to something, landed on something, and that is now the thing in your consciousness, not all other things. That's what's meant by conditioned experience. explicitly, directly, categorically stated like this in all the suttas. The unconditioned is when the mind has not gone to any object. It starts to become aware of its own self. It is consciousness without an object. Citta, the technical terms, citta, consciousness or mind. Aramana is the object of attention. So you have citta, what knows, and aramana is the thing that knows. When the mind doesn't go to any object, it isn't conditioned by any object. The citta becomes aware of the citta. It's called citta anaramana, the citta without an object. Okay? What this means in meditation is, if you observe directly as things actually are, without any philosophy or ideas or prayers, what you will see is your mind goes to this, thinks about what am I going to eat when I leave here? When I go to this shop, is this shop closed? Oh, is it a holiday or not a holiday? Now your mind is on holidays. Now somebody sneezes behind you and you're like, that person just sneezed. The back of my head is covered in goop. This actually happened. So now your attention has gone to that. While you're thinking about the goop on the back of your head, you're not thinking about Donald Trump. You're not thinking about the new Boeing 787 Dreamliner extended range. If you want to think about the new Dreamliner 787, actually it was the Airbus extended range, right? The 320 XLR extreme long range. I was looking at this plane. I got quite absorbed in it. Now my thought, that's my object. That's the thing that conditions consciousness. Then I think, oh, I need a cup of tea. So I go to put the cup of tea on. I think while I'm up, I'll go for a wee. So now that's my conditioned consciousness. Consciousness moves to this, 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 constantly without end. To a skilled meditator, that's what you start to see, because that's actually real. That's not controvertible. It's not a philosophy. It's not some idea. It's not a framework through which you have to believe things. It's what actually happens in your consciousness. At some point you get this, it's called nibbita, of consciousness going to an object, any object. You get nibbita means disenchantment with the object. You get disenchanted with the mind constantly going to things, and you get this desire for stillness. At that moment when the mind stops going to things, it returns to its own self. It's slow and it takes some time, and you have to settle into it and sink into it. But as you do so, the mind becomes really bright and powerful. Attention comes in from the level of the eyes, your head will come up. You will have a feeling of centering yourself because you know exactly when consciousness is going to an object, and you know exactly how to bring it back. This experience is different to all other experiences because this is one of restraint of the citta. It's not a meditation object. A meditation object is focus on the breathing, or focus on light, or focus on a mantra, or focus on a statue, or on a bowing practice. These are all practices. This thing is the unconditioned because it's consciousness that hasn't gone out to anything. This is the door that one opens up in first jhana, which is the experience the Buddha had under the tree, that he reports word for word verbatim. It's not disputed that that's what he said. So that experience you can get back to. That was the thing that he had as a child, that I knew as a child, that many of you have also experienced. One reason why when these experiences first arise is because you don't understand them. You don't know what they are, why they are, how you got to them. You've stumbled upon it by accident. And here's another thing. It's the experience of your own actual real self. And because of that, it appears as something familiar, not as something external or special or exciting. So, yes, you go into these experiences. I remember Marjo? Joe saw Marjo with, remember when I showed that, the film? about the American preacher. Weren't you there that day? Has anyone seen this movie? It's a terrific movie. I played it all over the world dozens of times. He was a child preacher. His parents were preachers, and his parents trained him as a 6-year-old to go out and preach the gospel. Fire and brimstone. You having those filthy cigarettes, you'll go to hell, blah, blah, blah. And he'd have all these gestures that his parents would teach him. One of which was to put his hand like this and walk around. He said he got it from Mick Jagger. But you see him doing these, preaching to these huge audiences, and you're going to hell, and everybody say hallelujah. And so he was trained as a child to do this, to make money for his parents, who were genuinely preachers. Lee, you saw this movie with us, didn't you?
Yeah.
Lee.
Yeah, now I remember.
No, you're not Lee.
He wasn't a Buddhist, he was like...
Lee is. You saw this movie with us.
I'm familiar with that movie.
So then, when he was 16, he left his family and he went off to become a hippie, to take drugs and drink and do all the things that he's been preaching that you shouldn't do. And then in his early 20s, he runs out of money. So he goes back to do the only thing that he's really good at, which is to preach gospel. But he doesn't believe any of it. He's a hippie. So he's preaching the gospel for a few years, and he'd get changed on the plane. He'd have his hippie clothes on, and then he'd go into the bathroom, and he'd come out with his preacher's clothes on, go and preach the gospel, make some money, and then go back to being a hippie. And then he invited a film crew to follow him, to expose him. It's a terrific movie, 1973 Academy Award-winning documentary.
What's the title?
Marjoe, M-A-R-J-O-E, which comes from Mary and Joseph. That's how devout his parents were. They called him Mary and Joseph. So Marjoe had this same thing, that he knew when he was preaching that he could create in people this kind of brightness and awakeness and a giving up. And he said, I'd love to preach if that's what it was about, but unfortunately, as soon as you have that euphoria, you start loading it with all these ideas of God and heaven and hell and Bible, and you weigh down the experience. So his goal was to expose himself as a fraud and then become a rock star, and he can give that experience to people. Trouble was, he wasn't a very good singer. And he failed as a rock star. He was a B-movie actor for a while. He did okay. Weirdly, 30 years after this, I showed the movie in Bangkok, and his PA, personal assistant, saw that we were sharing this movie in Bangkok. And I'd written a couple of things about the movie in the thing. And she wrote, I'm Marjoe's personal assistant currently, and there's a couple of good things that this guy said about me. And so I actually got a compliment from the original source. But that was the thing. These experiences that you have, you then load with all this religious stuff, all these religious ideas, and it happens in Buddhism too. You load it with all these suttas and ideas and definitions and Sanskrit, and then you're not getting back to that original experience. So you always know when people have started to get back and touch on this experience, the teachers that know about it. One, because that's the only thing they want to talk about. They don't want to talk about definitions and stories and blah, blah, blah. They just want to talk about this one thing. That's one way you can tell that they know what they're talking about. There's a humility that comes from it, because it's not about this idea or that idea. It's like any idea that you can, just to get people to touch it.
Yeah, so thank you for the lecture. And so what do you think is the role of all the theories then, if you're saying it's unnecessary, overloads the pure experience?
What's the question?
Like, what's the role of all the stuff that's built around this experience? And like you say, it's unnecessarily overloads this.
It does. When you put all your chips into the stories, then the stories become the thing, and you've lost the original experience. The stories are there in order to guide you back to a real thing. It's like a map. You can't venerate a map. You have to actually walk where the map is telling you, the treasure map, otherwise you don't get the treasure. So the stories are there to guide you. The Buddha said this himself. He said the Dhamma is a raft. It's not a ship or an ocean liner. It's not some great thing that you have to buy or build. It's something that's made out of the things around you, strapped together just enough to take you across the water. Then you get rid of it. So he said, in the same way, my Dhamma is a raft. It is only to take you to that experience. Once you're there, you abandon the raft. Yeah, but we get caught up on words and stories and things.
Thank you.
Any questions?
We have
Okay.
exactly 3 minutes left. And then
Quick question. I had this experience last week with you when we talked about the Four Noble Truths and that the truth existed before and will exist after we are here. When you talk about these moments, is that touching that?
it's getting there. It's getting that thing that just makes you stop. It's the stopping that is the actual experience. Like what was said is kind of by the by. It's that stopping moment, like So anything that can take you to that stopping moment is thing. But we have to understand the world correctly around us. Otherwise, you get caught up in it. So a lot of these, like insights, we call them, insights occur. Usually insights are the insight of backing off from worldly things. Insights usually are deleterious rather than, I don't know, insights usually take away the previous enchantment that you had with things. That's that insight. But the true experience, spiritual experiences is when you touch that thing and say, oh, that's the right thing. So again, the Buddha in this story, he said, well, that thing I experienced as a child under the tree, is that the way? And the idea came to him, yes, that is the correct way. So, yeah. Sometimes you just get those things. I remember I spent
One last question.
a long time trying
Okay,
to
sure.
understand why magnets don't fall off a fridge. And I know about work. Don't tell me about work, because that's the explanation, but it doesn't cut it. And then I was listening to Richard Feynman one time. You know Richard Feynman?
Mm-hmm.
He's just fantastic. He's just he's the Alan Watts of the scientific world. And he had this explanation. It's like, I got it. And I was so excited. And then I met the friend for lunch, and I said, I got it. Richard Feynman. He's so fantastic. You got to listen to this. And I played it for him, and he was like, yeah. And I realized as I was listening, I was like, yeah. But for me, it was just that moment where I just figured that out. I was so thrilled. Don't ask me to explain why. Magnets don't fall off a fridge. There's a lot of things we think we understand in the world and actually don't understand, like electricity. I've never met anyone who understands electricity. People think they do. Anyway.
Pandit, can you do us a little bit of a favor? You're not going to be here the first 2 Mondays of June. Can you explain a little bit about who your abbot is and he's a very well qualified speaker. He's one of our better speakers.
Sure.
Could you mention that?
Well, I won't be here for the first 2 Mondays next month, and probably July. We're still working on July. So Ajahn Vimok, he's an abbot of a temple in Rayong. It's not my abbot. I live in Bangkok, but so he'll be here for a couple of Mondays. He's a genuine meditator. Now he's very so it's hard to make sense of sometimes. But trust me, and if you look carefully at what he's saying, He's saying this one thing only: come back, 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 back. And he tries to say it in so many different ways. So he's quite scattered, but trust me, he really does know what he's talking about. And he's a terrific leader and an incredibly hard worker. So I respect him a lot. But he's the abbot of the monastery where we're building the retreat center right now.
Yeah.
So he's paying for it all.
Yeah, things are kind of happening, I think, Prabhupada Pandit. They're happening in a good way. Yeah, would you like to ask a question?
No, I think Nanda from IBSV is coming. She said she's coming on the...
Yeah, Matum, she'll be here next month. Yeah.
Yeah, Gil's going to come next.
She's a teacher in the university. You met her, right?
Yeah, she's my
Right, you're right, that's right. She's lovely. She will charm you. She's extremely charming. So yeah, definitely come for her. She'll be here. But you keep an eye on Facebook and meet up. As for the website, I know that it's disappeared. Our website host did call me up and apologise for deleting the entire website. This is Sandeep. Some of you remember him. I'm seeing him in a few days, and I'm going to have to write an entirely new website. It's coming. Okay. We done?
Okay, I'll make a few fast announcements,
Okay.
okay, and we can all get gone. Yeah, first of all, I think we're in a really good space in time in terms of what our speakers are. I've talked to Kun Best, who said there are, and Kun Anna, there are 2 slots available for the rest of the year, so we're in good shape, perhaps, hopefully. So that means every Monday, if you've got something not on, you can put Aree on as one of your things to do. So it's kind of, and we also have very good speakers. Pandit is coming normally on the first couple of Mondays, but there's also a whole bunch of other good speakers, and you can check with Facebook or whatever, but just come and you probably turn out okay, and we also have Dharma Circle. Okay, now, if you notice that the camera's here, that means you can catch what's been said on Facebook or YouTube. Yeah.
Our YouTube, we now have our official YouTube, Bhikkhu Bangkok Center. Okay, you can follow it. We have posted link on Facebook.
You know, I already had a little Bangkok Sangha YouTube channel
Okay.
with 2,000 subscribers.
Okay, we'll on that later.
We will
Okay.
debate. We could talk about this for the next hour, but yeah, okay. Supposedly we have we have a streaming system, and whether it's on Facebook or YouTube or where it's on, you can use Little Bangkok Sangha meditation group, and that will give you, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff coming off too. Okay, another note is that we're having donations, 2 boxes. One is for the speaker, and the other I have classed as miscellaneous, which means that it can go either to help. We're getting a really good deal from Aree. We're getting this free and air conditioning, electricity, and everything, and so we're kind of paying it off, and we also have our own expenses like grab taxis and stuff like that. So the other one goes for general, and the first one goes to Prabhupada Pandit as the speaker. And the last thing, I guess, is that it would really be appreciated if, by the way, if you wish to talk to Prabhupada Pandit later, you can come up and talk. He usually hangs in for another 15 or 20 minutes. And finally, help with the chairs. Now, Kun Best.
Tonight we're gonna have to return the seat and chairs to the original form. Please follow the lead of our volunteers here. Okay, and then 10 chairs gonna be in the room, and the others gonna be in the curtain.
So
Okay.
basically, these chairs go on the balcony.
Yeah.
The
So,
cushions,
If you can help with that afterwards, that would be
Okay, so then,
Okay.
and if you want directions, Kun Best would probably be the person to talk to.
also volunteers as well. Some of
On the volunteer, or his gang of volunteers. Okay, and finally, I always say at the very last, Joe may have
The
an
last one was
announcement.
finally already.
That's 2 finalies?
You're on about the
This
third one.
is
now.
postscript.
Well, one thing that we didn't mention yet is next week's speaker, we have a Zen teacher who came all the way from Israel. He was ordained in Japan, but because he's Israeli and he's also an actor and a poet and a theater director, he has some very, very unique ideas about Buddhism, you know, in the Zen tradition. So next week, he's going to be talking about what's unique about Zen, how is it different from other branches of Buddhism. Then the following week, because of all his experience in the arts, he's going to be speaking about that, Zen and the arts. And what I usually say in addition is some of us will go to a restaurant near the end of the story to continue the conversation and share our ideas, and everyone is welcome to join us.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. Thank everyone for coming, and
Okay.
hopefully we'll see you for Gil Alon next Monday.
So if you can bring the chairs into the back here.